All right, it is 5:45. We've got everyone here, so we'll get going. Any questions about the agenda tonight? Anything from you?
I do have two very brief items. First, just a reminder, you do now have your packets for Thornton Fest. It does have a run of show and there. Most of it's pretty typical. The one thing that I'll remind you is an addition this year is now the Volunteer of the Year recognition awards. There is a note that will be at 6:45 at the anniversary stage is when we'd like to have council members there, so that the mayor will give out that award, but we'd like all council members to be on the stage for that process.
So we're inviting all of those that were nominated, right?
That's right. I think at this point, we've got 4 individuals that were nominated that have confirmed. I think a couple were not available, and we believe both of the youth will be able to attend. So we won't have 100% of the nominees there, but we should have.
We can still acknowledge them even if they're not there.
What did you say?
We can still acknowledge them even if they're not there.
Yeah, that's right. Second piece is we have continued to try to coordinate with 27J about a joint meeting. And so we did get another proposal from the school district. They like, when possible, to hold these on a 5th Tuesday when they don't have conflicting business. That would, they have proposed September 29th. We do already have budget reviews scheduled for you on the 25th and the 29th. And so, as you'll remember, in prior years, we've done sort of a lengthier budget review that was difficult for scheduling. So we have kind of taken a couple of planning sessions and dedicated to budget. So that would be difficult. They take a break at the end of June and through all of July, and they don't hold any meetings. The one counter proposal that I did identify potentially to make back is both your August 18th and your September 1st planning sessions at this point are both have relatively few items. So I think there was hesitancy previously to dedicate one of your meetings, but they continue to try to find time.
You like them?
On the 18th of August or the 1st of September seems like a reasonable alternative to work through both schedules. So everybody okay with that and throwing it for an option?
Yeah. That's it for me.
All right.
Nothing for me, thank you.
All right, let's jump right in then. We have fireworks enforcement.
So this will be a team effort. W. Chief Hawkins is going to introduce this. So the council will remember we came to you with some ordinance changes that have since been put into place to help with fireworks enforcement. We also had a previous discussion about mitigations for the 4th of July celebration. We made a commitment as we got closer to the 4th of July to touch back in on both of those pieces, enforcement, education, and event planning. And so that's what we're here to do tonight. So I'll give it to Chief Hawkins.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Paul Hawkins from the Police Department. I've got Lieutenant Bob Peterson up here with me. He's going to go through the presentation and we'll try to answer any questions related to the actual enforcement side of it. And we've got Chief Kelly up here to talk about the coordinated response, not only to the fireworks themselves, but any education stuff that's going on. And then we've got Chris Stanky up here to talk for the parks perspective of things. I'm going to hand it over to Bob real quick and get into the slideshow and we'll go from there.
All right, he just kind of went over it. The purpose is to update Council on Public Safety, Fireworks Enforcement, Community Strategy, and the actual fireworks show. We actually have already approved this. This is the big piece that we took it from 10 to 38, and we can now cite homeowners, more of a nuisance. So that should make enforcement a little easier this year. We went over it prior. We were averaging about 16 or 17 tickets a year, which is pretty low. So hopefully this will help us with our enforcement efforts this year. Call volume, we anticipate to be right around what it is every year. For 500 fireworks complaints around the 4th, over 210 just on the 4th. A lot of them are made anonymous. We're reaching out with our PIOs and trying to reach out to the community and express how they can more effectively report so that we can enforce instead of just calling in and saying they're hearing fireworks. And obviously new ordinance is going to help us with that, it sounds like. Bubble messaging boards came in this week. They should already be out and deployed, doing education on the legality of fireworks in Thornton, which is they are illegal. They will be out all the way until 2 weeks past the 4th. So those will be moved around the city for next month and then 2 weeks after the actual event. Talked a little bit about public service announcements through the police and fire. On the police side, we've already started with our PIOs. We've got some flyers out, some stuff going out to talk about the ordinance changes and our enforcement efforts and what's legal and what's not. We've already started on briefing training, making our folks aware of the changes so that they know that their stance is going to be a little different and how they can more effectively enforce it. And community liaison officers through this month will be going to the high density housing communities and identifying previous problem locations and trying to do some education out there prior to it becoming a problem. Overtime shifts will start 2 weeks prior to the 4th and go 2 weeks after during identified times and dates, mostly Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. During when it starts getting dark until about midnight or until 02. 2 fireworks enforcement cars. We've historically put those out there on the 4th and they're hard to fill. So we just made that a part of our actual ops plan and we've mandated some folks to work that. So we have a little extra enforcement and help out on the road on the actual night of the 4th of July. And anything that needs to be enforced at the actual event, there will be plenty of police officers at the event to assist with that. All right. I don't think this part's me. Here you go. Oh, sorry. One more up. Nope, other way. Big button. One more time. Here we go.
So council, good evening. So we've had some previous conversation about mortar size, and so Steve and I had an opportunity to talk to Zambelli Fireworks, which is our fireworks company. And Zambelli is really truly one of the best fireworks companies in the nation. Does a majority of the shows in the nation, and in talking with them, he's assured us that if we reduce mortar size to 5 inches, we can have a quality show that will reduce the size, the height, and the width. And by reducing that, it'll be a safer show, but yet the public will not see a difference, should not see a difference. And so the customer experience should be just as it is today and ultimately be a safer show. So we made that commitment with Zambelli Fireworks to try to create a safer environment.
So with the reduced mortars, the fountain fireworks, we'll still have our fallout zones. We're going to do the same mitigation efforts that we talked about before, wetting down the areas. And we will have a number of resources on site during the event, as I expressed previously, up to 2 Type 6 brush trucks, plus an engine company, plus additional personnel. And there will, as with previous shows, there will be weather condition triggers that we will look at the time of the show as a go or no go for the fireworks, specific to wind conditions. We have been in a generally wet weather and we're happy to see that continue. Wet weather condition, we expect that to continue for the next few weeks. And we will continue to watch this as we get closer. But this is the fireworks plan for the 4th. I feel confident with both our response and the show we're going to provide. We're happy to take any questions on this or on the enforcement and the communication.
Any questions? Evan?
Was there a cost difference going from the 6 inch to the 5 inch that?
Good question. There's not a difference. What we had them do is create more of a denser show. So there's not any cost difference at all.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the effort to make sure that the community still gets a great show, but we're staying safe at the same time. Well, next is designating and voting person for CML and NLC.
So this is a quick logistical item. Kevin Borgett will come through to walk us through to make sure that we are prepared for some upcoming meetings.
All right. Thank you, Kenzie. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I will try to be very brief on this item. Pursuant to City Council Policy 4.3, council must designate a delegate to cast votes on behalf of the city at the CML and NLC annual business meetings. CML is scheduled for actually later this month, now that we're in June, scheduled from June 22nd to the 25th in Westminster. The annual meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, June 24th at 1:30 p.m. According to my notes, we have Mayor Coleman, Councilmember Martinez, Councilmember Algie, and Councilmember Russell scheduled to attend. And so per your policy, need to designate both an individual and an alternate.
Is someone interested? I cannot attend the business meeting this year.
I can do it.
Right, John? We need an alternate as well. Chris, Justin, Wednesday at 1:30?
Yeah, it's the business meeting is Wednesday, June 24th at 1:30.
Is it possible to get a reminder as well with that too? Please, thank you.
So what time?
1:30 is when the meeting starts.
Schedule at that time, but if it's alternate.
It should just be alternate, so John would
Yeah.
cover it. The only
Yeah,
thing you
I'll-
have to is if he can't make it for
Okay.
some reason.
So you know what room? I know what
And it'll
hotel.
be on the schedule too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Justin.
Awesome. Okay. And then for the NLC is scheduled for November 18th through the 21st. It's in Nashville, Tennessee. The annual business meeting has not yet been fully scheduled. They have it listed on their trip planner as taking place on Saturday, November 21st. And according to our notes, we have all council members registered to attend the NLC. So again, need to designate an individual and an alternate.
And I'm on the board, so I have to be there anyway, so I'm happy to be the designated voter for this one. We also need an alternate.
I can be an alternate there as well.
All right, so we will bring forward the resolutions that couple.
Great,
Thanks.
easy. All right, council travel policy and informal board meetings.
Yeah, so this is following up on a request from Councilmember Martinez to take a second look at the travel policy. So this is gonna be a tag team between Rob Colstead and Kevin Forget. One of the things that I will just say here, we did take an attempt to look at other practices. One of the things you're gonna hear that it was a little bit outside the original request is, as we looked at this policy, there were a lot of different things in this basket of the policy. So partially, part of our recommendations are not only updating the provisions, but potentially pulling out some elements of this policy that really didn't have anything to do with travel or expenditures. And so we are going to use the term recommendation in the presentation. Want to be really clear here, this is a council policy. And so, you know, when we say recommendation, these are some starting places for discussion, but clearly want to reinforce that this should be a policy that reflects the norms and expectations of the council. So if there are ways we can change this, happy to do that. Again, just wanted to create a starting place for conversation. Now I'll give the floor to Rob.
Thank you, Tansy. So as Tansy mentioned, the travel policy, if you've read it, is home to many different things. And so along with discussing kind of overall travel for conferences and that kind of thing, we thought this was an opportunity to also talk about informal ward meetings and then also memberships, and then clean up a couple of things with city and other benefits as well as sponsorship requests. Those last two are really more at this point, all we're really recommending is some cleanup to recognize your current process for those two. But again, as Tansy said, we're really just looking for your direction on this. I will recognize the city attorney's office was instrumental in helping us do the research as well as craft the initial kind of straw person recommendation for y'all. And I will note, I think the way we're going to try to go through this is kind of touch on the travel policy, pause, get a little bit of feedback, and then move on to the next one because they kind of do operate as individual issues. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Tansy, and good evening again. I didn't make it very far. But way of background, you know, as Sandy mentioned, city council did provide some staff direction to take a look at the travel policy and informal award meetings. Currently, the city's expense reimbursement policy does provide some guidance on process and on eligible costs related to travel. However, it doesn't necessarily, you know, go into limits or go into, you know, to caps or anything like that with travel. So the expense policy also does provide it mentions that there's a $200 allowance limit for informal award meetings, but really doesn't provide any direction beyond that $200 allowance for informal award meetings. And it lists out the eligible costs. And so we also recognize while we're doing some of the research and looking at these policies that the current policy doesn't really speak to about memberships, and memberships are obviously very closely aligned with a lot of the council travel. So I thought it would be important to take a look at that. And then we also recognize the opportunity that there are currently 3 separate city council policies that talk about and govern sponsorships, and there may be an opportunity to consolidate that. So wanted to just kind of review that with you all tonight. So starting with travel, staff did do some peer city research. What we did find is that most of the cities that we did take a look at did have a limit, either a dollar cap per year or a per trip limit. So we did see that the allowance limit, if there was a dollar cap, ranged from about $6,500 to $11,000 per council member per year. And we did find a policy that also included a limit of up to two out-of-state trips per council member per year. So as Tansy mentioned, we were just going to provide a concept for consideration, you know, a bit of a conversation starter. One thing to consider is potentially having a limit of trip limit per year per council member. It could include 2 out-of-state trips per year and 1 in-state trip per year. The one in-state trip would be greater than 25 miles from the city. The basis of that recommendation is kind of on current practice would be, you know, 2 NLC conferences and then CML conference. Obviously, there could be some flexibility to substitute those meetings, but again, the limit amounts were kind of based on kind of the current practice of the 2 NLCs and the CML.
There's 3
CML conference. What's that?
There's 3 NLCs. There's a summer meeting too. Because I'm on the board and the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee, and they do summer meetings.
Mayor, is that specifically for people that are on the board, or is that open to
It's
anyone?
open to anybody who's a member of those groups, and it doesn't require much to be a member of the group. The board and the chairs of those committees are expected to attend, but anybody can if they're members of those groups.
That's helpful. Thank you. That relates back into kind of the conversation around memberships too. And if you end up selecting into a leadership role. So thank you.
That also includes the constituency groups. In
Yeah,
addition to the advocacy committees.
the first tier suburbs or even the Leos, right?
Right.
Hilo,
And
yeah,
they're not always at the same place as the main one.
right.
For example, Cherish is going to Oklahoma, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm going to Kentucky.
And you're going to Kentucky.
exactly.
That,
Sorry to
No,
throw you off right in the
that-
beginning.
well, I think that does go, you know, into the kind of the next bullet there that, you know, that if there was, if you hit your 2-year limit, if that you put that in place, that, you know, could be permissible to go beyond that with, you know, general consensus of council with a written request. So you could put some parameters around things of that nature. Would just recommend, you know, including travel expenses as part of the annual budget process. It also could potentially think about having a carve out for sponsored, 100% sponsored travel. So where all costs are covered by a third party, potentially not counting that against the per limit if you were to go that route. And then also potentially coming up with an exclusion for the DC lobbying trip, the council retreat, or if there's any other city initiated travel, again, could be excluded from that limit. So we'll pause there.
Justin?
Yeah, so you mentioned you did a survey of other communities and they had either the per dollar or the per trip. And your recommendation here is a per trip. What led you to that over per dollar as something that you thought you would recommend to the council?
Yeah, I think the per dollar, you know, the dollar limit changes. So obviously you could have a provision in that would say that it could be adjusted annually. Again, I think the basis was thinking about kind of the current practice in numbers of trips versus the dollar amount. I mentioned the range is between 6,500 and 11,000, what we found in those per cities. And, you know, the cost of travel these days, I don't know how far that will get you. So thinking a little bit more on the per trip limit was kind of what we thought would be just potentially a better avenue to pursue.
We can do either. I think we landed on that just because from an administrative standpoint, like Kevin said, like going to one city versus another, the cost could vary dramatically based on hotel airfare. And we thought the intent was more about like getting out and doing this training and establishing some level of limits. And so that seemed administratively a little bit easier for us and quite frankly for you all to manage. But either way, I think we can do either one and figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, okay. I was just interested to know if there was a train of thought that you are following. Thank you.
Devin?
Given that there's the potential for the boards for the energy and the different ones from NLC, would we be able to look at something instead of going 2 out of state and 1 in state, just to make it around 3 trips period and marking at that point? Because then you can choose if you're going to want to go to CML up in Breckenridge, or if you want to go to Tulsa or wherever in Oklahoma for that trip. It's up to you on that decision.
I think you could establish whichever limit you want to. The other thing that we toyed around with, I'm not quite exactly sure how the NLC committees work. I think I'm actually on one and I'm complete ignorance of how it actually works the first year, but you know,
My chair's sitting over here.
yeah. Again, not knowing how they work, you could see a provision for if you are on one of those committees that is included above your, you know, above your 2 or whatever you establish the limit as.
I was pondering on this and it was more based on the dollar philosophy, but I agree with what you guys are saying. So some council members are just more active. They sit on more boards and require more travel. If we were to say set it at 3, then my suggestion is then if someone's not utilizing all the trips, like Tony didn't travel a whole lot. You know,
Actually, Tony traveled quite a bit.
I never.
Yeah, he went to NLC, he went to CML.
He traveled
Yeah.
less, I will say
He
that.
did,
And
yeah.
so what my thought process was then, all right, you're at your 3, should that be the theoretical number? But somebody else doesn't have any travel. We're halfway through the year this year, you know, with a formal request like, hey, Drew, you're not going anywhere this year. Can I get one of the excess that you have? And then that way it keeps people from going like, I got 7 this year and some people have 1 or 2. Obviously 1 is receiving more benefit. So that might also help keep you at a reasonable number. Just pick up what's left over from some other council members that maybe don't sit on boards or travel as much. I wouldn't care if I wasn't going anywhere. Yeah, happily take my extra trip.
I travel so much for work, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same.
The only concern I would have with that is that then we're horse trading essentially to say, well, can you give me your trip? And then like, so it'd be more if we kept it like stable and then anything above that, then you have to ask approval from council. Would probably be easier than
All right, so then
trying to cut a deal with someone to give me your trip.
We did a hard 3 and then go, if you want more, then just come to council and ask.
yeah, so why set a limit then if we're always just gonna talk about it?
Because that doesn't mean I'm gonna say yes to your ask.
We've never said no, but there is
Yeah,
that.
that's just it, like, what's the problem?
Justin?
Yeah, so before we start trying to figure out the ideal numbers, interested to know what the rest of the council thinks about a per dollar approach. And, you know, one of the reasons why I even brought this up in the first place was thinking about how to make to be more consistent with a budgeting process and in terms of this category. And you know, setting a dollar amount would make that a whole lot easier. And it would also allow us to make our own choices on like the types of conference. For example, some cities like Broken Arrow, Oklahoma might be a little bit cheaper than, you know, LA or something like that. So you might be able to get more in if you're allocating a budget, just like we would do with any other decision that we make. So yeah, I see the advantages, but I do also see it positives for both sides. But, you know, interested to know what the council thinks about that other approach.
That's a harder one to set, because if you think about like when we went to DC for NLC, that was a pretty expensive trip for the hotel and things that are there.
Mhm.
If we set an amount for $7,000, I think when we looked at it, it was like $4,000 or something, $5,000 for each one of us to go there, which means now you're at one trip. Because once you start incorporating $800 flights or $600 flights to fly out somewhere else, you've already burnt through your entire budget.
Sure. If we set the budget the right number though, that.
We don't have to say
theoretically,
7, right?
Yeah, so, but yeah, and then it does make me think, I feel like maybe we are going to exceed the budget this year because,
I'm pretty sure we've exceeded it every year.
yeah, we exceeded every year, so there's another thing to think about. Consistently exceeding it, there's something that we should address. Yeah, was some thoughts.
Yeah, Roberta and then John.
I like the idea of doing the number of trips because there's also other factors that can play into it, like right now, the gas prices, well, they're going down a little bit right now, but they were pretty bad, so then the cost of flights goes up, and that's just configuring what's going on in the world into the cost of a trip can just be tricky, and then that would take away from the ability to go on another trip if that were to be needed or desired for a specific reason. So I like the idea of, because now technically we don't have to really ask, am I correct? We don't have to ask council.
It's a courtesy to bring it to council. Council can say, no, we don't want you to go. I don't know that it was ever written down that way, though.
Okay.
So we can make that actually a requirement.
Could we
I know that.
get clarification what the current policy is?
Sorry, I was not ready with that.
I don't have it in front of me verbatim, but it does make, it states notifying the council is what
So notify versus permission.
Right.
We could change that too, that it would require approval from the council.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we're here, is you have to give notice or not. So this option would allow you not to have to give.
Well, currently, the way this is written, if it's just notice, if you guys say, I don't want you to go to that, I can be like, I don't care.
That's why we're having this conversation.
So I would, my preference would be to have a set number like 3 and then ask permission for the 4th.
So it would be 3 out of state and 1 in state?
Yeah. And then
Say
it says at the bottom there, what they have as a suggestion is lobbying, council retreat, and other city initiated travel would be excluded from the limit.
I would also say that if it's, the city's not paying for it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so like,
You still notify,
Well,
but.
That's where the dollar thing is an advantage, because if somebody's
True.
paying for it, nothing on your,
Right.
or if somebody pays for half of it. I went to the Malaya one last year. I think they covered like 80% of it, so how would that factor into trip?
It would probably count as
It would
one,
count
or
as
it would
one,
be
even if
the
it
one
was-
you asked for an addition, and you'd say, which is what you did. You came and said 80% is covered by the scholarship, and we said, yeah, sounds great.
yeah, local progress pays for all of it except for $100 for the registration, so, but that's because I applied for a scholarship. If you don't apply, then you pay for it, so.
John?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. What's our collectively, what's our cumulative travel budget for our trips per year?
2026 is 66,000.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I thought that was the number, correct. Yeah, so yeah, I do, everyone's bringing up great points here. I do like what the Mayor Pro Tem suggested. Of course, she reached out to us about her trip next month, as a courtesy. Yeah, because we have 3, like I said, because a lot of us do, Chris and I had this conversation after the, at the Active Adult Center this afternoon. It's like, right now I'm not doing much travel, right? In my boards that I'm on now, but that could change during my tenure, right? In 2 years, when the next council sits, we're gonna reassigning boards and commissions again. And I may be on a board that, hey, need to go travel. Let's say you go to, we'll just say California, sake of argument, right? And then, so yeah, I like, 3 out of state and then the 1 in state. Of course, this year with CML being in Westminster, we don't have to worry about the hotel expenses. So that saves the city money for this year. But then of course, next year it's gonna be a whole different, ball of wax. So yeah, like I said, everybody's bringing up great points tonight, but I do like the, three out of state and then one in state, then anything beyond that, you know, just a courtesy to council to, hey, I'm gonna go to this conference in
A
California. in
courtesy
September.
or approval?
Well, oh, gosh,
I said approval.
approval, sorry, approval, I stand correct, approval, thank you. I apologize, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah.
And if I could, the current policy says council members will inform city council in advance of travel out of state to attend training programs, conferences, and events where a council member is representing the city.
Approval then.
So we could change that to approval.
Yeah.
Roberta?
I would just think to, instead of, what is the word, what does the verbiage say again in the policy, like you shall or?
Council members will inform the city.
Okay, so you do need to no matter what.
It doesn't say how, but it says will inform. Right?
Could be email, could be here, but it doesn't say approve.
Great. Okay. Just wanna make sure that's.
All right, so the suggestion then is 3 out of state, 1 in state, and then approval for more. Noting that Justin's suggestion is a dollar amount.
Yes. Noted.
Well, my suggestion was just 3, period, not one, not just 3 total.
No matter where they are.
Yeah.
All right, we need to get to consensus here. So let's go back, let's start with Justin's, because I'm not hearing a whole lot of support. I just want to see on the dollar amounts. Do we want to continue that conversation and move on to the number?
I'm not opposed to the dollar amount. I think it makes sense. Especially, Kevin, did you send out that budget? I'm trying to find it in my email and I cannot find it, but it showed like what our budget was and what was actually expended each year. Do you have that on you right now?
I have it right in front of me.
Okay.
I can re-forward it to the council.
I think it'd be helpful to see that. Because I do like the dollar amount. I mean, if it keeps us honest with what we said is our budget, but at the same time, I know that's probably an administrative headache to try to track that, and it might be easier to just stick with the 3 trips total for the year. The horse trading thing, I understand that concept, and I think it could be a good idea. The problem is that, I think the challenge might be that if everybody's racing to get trips in now, and if you trade out, now you've lost out if you want to do something later in the year. And so for fairness sake, if all of my trips end up at the end of the year, I want to still have that available as a council member. So I don't know I think instead of horse trading, it could just be permission based, and that just makes sense to me. So if we can do 3 trips and stay in budget, then I'm happy ultimately. So.
I got Roberta, then Devin.
Does the policy say anything about it being like in the continental US?
Good question. Let's go to Alaska.
It's more towards city business. So you have to be, going to a conference that involves city.
Trying to travel.
So if we're not going to give a dollar amount, which I don't think we should, I think it should be the 3. But I do think we should limit or put some sort of limitations around location, because many, many moons ago, when I first started on Tashco, a very nice resident brought up the idea of sister cities. And my only beef with it was that I saw council members in the city of Denver going on fancy trips to Africa and other cities. And I was like, that could get like, the sister city idea was cool, I thought, aside from I just did not find it very conducive to anything in the city of Thornton to have council members traveling overseas to other countries to do that kind of stuff, because it just looked frivolous to me when I would see it. And this was a while ago, but that's just an example of how that could get completely misused, I think, in my opinion. So is there any type of language we could put in this policy to make sure that we limit that type of stuff?
Or with the council approval, there are opportunities on the mayor's side to travel internationally. There's groups that go that like to, I think there's one that went to Venezuela last year,
Mhm.
Puerto Rico this year. I haven't attended any of them. I did go to Switzerland, but I didn't pay for it, or the city didn't pay for it.
Yeah, so that's
That was a little
different,
different.
that's different, but
I
like,
would not have had the city pay for
yeah,
that.
cause like
trip.
Hilo's talked about like, let's go to the border and I'm like, well, okay, well, what's really, how's that gonna, what would we be learning there? But also, like, that could get expensive, right? So,
Brighton has a policy that doesn't allow them to leave the continental US. So they can't even go to Hawaii or Alaska.
I mean, it's Brighton, so who's going to?
Well, the US Conference of Mayors had their conference in Hawaii a few years ago and our mayor went. So.
or just the 50 state, I don't know, I mean, I'm just saying, like, you have people going to France and Ireland and, on fancy trips, and it's.
Yep, I know what we're talking about. Mhm.
Well, I think that would have to be, well, and we could say that these 3 trips are limited to the United States. Anything above that would have to have council approval.
I'm fine with that. I think it should be a discussion instead of like, oh yeah, we're just, one of my trips is France.
We're still talking approval, right? That's still on the table as approval of anything above those 3, but 3 in the US.
So if one of them was, one of your 3 is to France.
Right, I see what you're saying. So we would limit those 3 to the US.
Yes.
Yes.
So that is your suggestion, okay?
Yes.
Mhm.
All right.
Anything above and beyond that would have to be approved by council and have a discussion.
Right, so that's what's on the table now. I have Devin and Chris.
So currently, it sounds like we have roughly a budget of about $9,000 per person. Oh, sorry. $70,000 per person. I think if we did the 3 and then did a not to exceed, that would also help with the funding aspect of it as well. Where you can be like, yeah, if you want to go on this one, but Miami's gonna cost you more than, Tulsa, then that's great, but, I think that helps, and that also kind of helps solve some of the problems there because an international flight's gonna push that budget insane anyway, so, if we just did a kind of combination between the 2, you can have your 3, but then also a do not exceed of this amount. Cause it sounds like every year we break that anyway, so maybe we need to evaluate and see what that number is that we typically go over. And then we
I almost
can-
feel like you need an either a number or a dollar amount. Because from a tracking standpoint, that becomes very complex.
Well, it shouldn't, because you should be buying economy class and.
Well, we have a policy that already covers all that, right? So we have limits on what we can purchase for flights and hotels. That's already covered.
Then my stance is still just 3 total, period then. And anything I would say anything that's international would have to come in front of council anyway.
Chris?
I'm hearing everybody and I'll throw this one out then too. 'Cause I still struggle to see like, why do we need approval? You said no one's ever really denied it, so notification satisfies me. I would say approval, if that were to become part of this, would be if, above and beyond the 3 or whatever gets selected.
I think that's what we're saying.
No, I'm saying approval. One second. If we
Sorry.
do approval on anything above and beyond that, that's like 2,000 or some sort of like, because that answers her question then like, all right, you're going to Paris, you need to bring that to council because that's going to be obviously more than 2,000. But since we just agree to let everybody go, if you're doing it $1,500 and that's your 5th trip, what do we even need approval for? Like we've self-managed each other. You said it's never really been an issue. So
We've also had nobody try to take advantage of it, just to be clear.
right. So are we putting rules in place that are just unnecessary is where I'm going. Like we give notification, that's fine. But if you're on your 5th trip and it's a $5,000 Paris trip, that would trigger something for approval. My dollar amount is like anything above 2,000. That's,
So you're saying no limit, but if it's over 2,000, you have to get approval.
yeah, because otherwise, what's the point of even having an approval process? We're just gonna notify each other and say, yeah, go. You're learning, you're learning.
That's where my not to exceed amount would go into that.
That's what I was hearing from you. So like to kind of feather in what Devin was saying was anything above and beyond, outside of our 3 approved or 3 trips. If you, again, you want to go to Paris.
You're still saying 3 trips is covered.
3, 4, I don't care what that number is.
Right,
Again,
but-
we're gonna settle on something, but, you know, so someone isn't going to Cairo on their 7th trip, like, look, that's gonna need an approval. That's a very unique situation. You said it doesn't happen much. So are we just layering and discussing a lot of rules that really are never gonna be enforced or needed? Maybe there's just one rule that needs to be, any trips out in excess of your allotted amount above 2,000, then you need to get approval. Anything that falls underneath that, like, sure, go to Oklahoma. It's probably $15. So we'll go twice. Yeah, I grew up in Texas, so everybody knows what we do at Oklahoma. So, yeah, I'm not.
So I'm hearing general consensus on 3 as the standard.
3, 4, whatever.
And then, so then the suggestion would be US only for those 3. And then anything over $2,000 after those 3 would require approval.
Yeah, otherwise it's just.
And I would say any travel outside of the US should also be approval.
Yeah, cause it's probably gonna be more than 2,000 anyway.
But even if you're
But yes.
traveling, I would say even if you're traveling and you're not paying for it, notification still needs to happen. If it's
Yeah,
outside
yeah,
of the US.
notification, cause that's what we already do.
Mhm.
You know, we're just adding a lot of extra approval process that I think is needless, so simplify it is what I'm asking.
I say, you know, we shouldn't completely eliminate the international. I would say it has to be approved, right? And
Uh-huh.
even if it's one of the 3, we're finally go on one trip in a year, right? And it's somewhere outside the US, it would have to be approved.
Uh-huh.
And we would allow that as long as it's approved, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that we're saying that the 3 is, you have 3 in the US that you don't have to get approval for.
Yes.
And then well, we haven't gotten that one yet. We just have a consensus on the 3 right now. It doesn't matter which 3, but we only have consensus on 3. Well, I'll get that one in a second. But then after that, if it's over 2,000, you have to get approval, or if it's out of the country, you have to get approval.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, then to Cherish's question, are we including one in state? So CML essentially.
Yeah.
So 3, yeah, 4 total.
Yeah, 4 total, and then anything above 2,000. Yeah. Is that clear for you? I mean.
So 4 total, 3 can be anywhere, 1 has to be in the state.
So
Yeah.
I do have a clarification just so for drafting, so.
Oh, sorry, Drew, I'll get you next.
The limit of 3, no financial limit on that. In that case, is the expectation that there would be a notification to the rest of the council?
Yes.
So the 3 national, not international, there's notification beyond those 3. If it's less than 2,000, there'd be notification to the council, but not approval required. If it was over 2,000, then the council would have to approve it.
Or if it's out of the country.
Or if it's out of the country. And out of the country is true across the board.
Yep. And then Drew, you had one more.
Thanks, Nancy, for sending that email out. You can see the expenditures the last few years. Up until 2024, we'd never exceeded our budget as a council. But it looks like the last few years, both, it looks like, about 6,000 over to 7,000. So I think on the approval front, I'm a fan of the three trips as like an allocation to each council member, but I do think we should hold ourselves accountable to hitting our budget. So if we exceed the budget that we set for ourselves, there should be some sort of accountability to like why we need to spend more. Because I mean, our residents are gonna ask us that.
Yeah, but we don't have any control over what fuels them, right?
Well, I mean, I still think if we set a budget, we should know where we're
We
at.
should at least have a conversation to know if we need to modify the budget. Is that what you're saying?
And really say, okay, is that trip, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are we lobbying and, we're gonna get millions of dollars for this, out of this trip, or is it just a learning event? So I think.
What's the added benefit there?
Yeah, is it worth exceeding our budget? So I would say we should incorporate, if we have our budget, and if we have to exceed that, then we need to at least acknowledge that we're exceeding our budget, and here's why we're okay with that.
Yeah, based on the email Tansy just sent, we're already at $47,000. We haven't even did the NSO summit for Nashville yet.
Right.
And all of us are going to that.
Yeah.
So
So the request then is to have our budget check-in regularly on this? Is that something we could add pretty easy?
Yes, I mean, at any point, we may have actual expenditures that have happened and then
Right.
things that are planned. So I do think it would be helpful if people are gonna make a request that we knew it in advance so that we could make sure that we have pulled the most recent updates, both of what's actually spent and what's pending.
Yeah.
And so we could more easily probably, it would be difficult for us to access that information real time.
And I don't think that would be the expectation. I think it would be like, oh, hey, by the way, it's August and we're at 60,000 or 66,000. So now we need to really take a hard look at what are we doing the rest of the year and should we do that?
Yeah.
And that's really all I'm getting out there.
Okay, not transactionally when requests are made, but just a standing update. Okay.
Justin?
Yeah, did we all agree to exclude the city initiated DC lobbying?
We hadn't got to that point yet,
Okay.
but that is a very good question.
Yeah.
I think we should exclude it because that is specifically related to city business.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that we clarify that.
Yeah, that has obvious financial benefits for the city.
But I think in every year we do this where we analyze whether or not the last trip was worthwhile. Like, so for the new people at the end of the DC lobbying trip, we actually will go through it with our lobbyists to see what did we get out of this? Is it beneficial? And do we want to do it again the next year? And we can decide it's not.
Do we currently include the DC lobbying trip into the budget that you just sent out? Is that already in here?
I don't believe so.
But it was already excluded from that budget line anyway.
We had a conversation about that, tried to make sure we were doing apples to apples, but let's pull up the data.
If, like the DC lobbying, the council retreats, those things, if they're already excluded from that budget line, then I don't see that as much of a critical issue as long as it's being accounted for somewhere else on a different budget line.
It looks like it is in this budget. It says year to date, included in this amount is the 6,500 for the DC lobbying trip.
Yeah, and see, then that's the part that's concerning with that too, is because that means that we're even adding more expenses on top of that again. So this $65,000, this $60,000 budget just now turned into a $80,000 budget in a matter of half an hour.
I don't know that we're adding more. I think we're being realistic about the expectations for this year. There have been years in the past, one year was COVID. So, I mean, 2021, nothing happened. But there were people that were not engaged and not active. That was actually a bone of contention, that not everybody was as active as everybody. And so now we have a much more active group of council members. And so now we're almost doing the opposite of saying we're too active. And so we can't have both ways. We either need to allow us to be active or say we're not going to do anything.
Agreed, but to Drew's point earlier, I think it's more of the, what's the added benefit that's gonna be coming out of it? Just to sign up for one because you're a member of a certain thing, you wanna go to that event, doesn't necessarily mean that's contributing anything back to the city. I think there needs to be a tit for tat on what you're actually bringing back to the table. Especially if we're gonna be spending, $100,000 of the taxpayers' money to be traveling to these trips.
Don't disagree. I got Justin and then Chris.
Yeah, again, I'm gonna see, this is exactly why I like the dollar amount, because it helps me decide, is this worth it? Is this trip to wherever? If it's just one of a lot of trips, it could be a very expensive trip and not very high value. That wouldn't necessarily, there's more trade-offs to be made when you're factoring in a dollar spend. I get the arguments, it's harder, but I do like how we're working towards some kind of compromise there, but factoring in that, what's the value of these trips, I think is an important conversation. I don't know how we judge
you
that, how you do that, but I think I do like how we have that conversation about the DC lobby trip being like at the end of each round. And because we used to just combine them with the NLC congressional conference. And you could easily do that again in the future. So, and then same with the going out of town for the retreat. So, I don't know. I'd like to figure out how we can do that. I'm not sure what we can do. Maybe assure ourselves that we have that like on the agenda in a planning session after trips or something like that. I know some cities like have write-ups, like I think Broomfield requires council members to present what they did at the conference.
So we do have that in our discussion,
Okay,
and we do talk about it after these
Yeah.
trips. It's not a written requirement, but we can obviously require each other to do that.
sure.
Chris?
That's exactly what I was gonna touch on when we were in Salt Lake. Austin sat next to me from Broomfield on a bus and said, "What the hell are you writing, dude?" And he's cranking out his report from, the meetings that you attend, what there's value add. I don't know if they actually present it or if it's something that just gets emailed to council so that everybody can say, all right, this guy's pretty active. He went to a conference, but he's hitting, 6 meetings a day, and it's more work for us. But if we want the accountability that Devin's referring to, that would also motivate you. Like, I'm not just gonna take the trip and goof off. I owe some actual notes back to my colleagues when I return. So you're either a liar, which I hope you're not, or you're gonna do the legwork to justify you going on that trip and having some content to bring back. So
Yeah.
we can add accountability reports, and
I also
don't-
don't want to punish the council because we've done a really good job of doing that. We bring
I don't
items back,
disagree,
like
but I'm
the,
trying to meet his needs.
I get it, but I also, to the whole point of we fixing a problem we don't really have, right? Is that we do a good job of bringing things back to the council. We did the East Lake Street Fair because Jessica actually brought it back after an NLC event. And we've done other events throughout the city, biking events and other incredible work that the city has done based on information that we've brought back from these council trips. So there is an expectation that they have to be valuable. There is an expectation that we share that information. We are doing that. A written report, I don't think is gonna make it any better
I would argue if we're doing that so well, why are we having this discussion?
because a council member asked for it.
That means that it's something we should be looking into and kind of digging into more.
I think it's because there's clarity on how many trips. And then, so that's what we're trying to get is like, is it just a free for all? Is it really having a conversation? And if we want to limit the trips to NLC and CML, we know the benefit of those two groups, and then anything above that, maybe we can change. Go ahead.
And I think Devin makes a good point. Another option is don't do anything.
Don't change anything, you
Don't
mean?
change anything, yeah.
And I like the idea of having accountability. I like the idea of putting some guide rails around it that we haven't had. And for clarity, and I think that helps staff so that they're not stuck in the position of where you say, well, I'm gonna go on this trip to Paris. And staff's like, well, I can't tell you no.
Right.
So
And technically right now, council can't tell you no, right?
well, that's what, the only thing I wanted to change was say that a council approval, but yeah. But we've never said no, but then again, we always justify what we're doing. Chris?
Yeah, so if we're circling back to doing very little, then I re-propose my thing, change nothing and just say if you're going on additional trips above 2,000, that's the only time you need approval. Otherwise, we're self-policing ourselves and we're doing a good job. I mean, we're coming full circle now. So at this point, my suggestion still remains the same. We
Is
already
the
have,
3 and 2,000 or just 2,000 for anything?
no, the allotted trips are
3 for
fine.
fun.
Anything
Uh-huh.
in excess, like if it's Naleo or something like that and it's over 2,000, then you're getting.
Which is where we still are, that's the closest we have to consensus right now, is for that.
Yeah.
I've only had like 3, 4 people say that that's what they want to do. Dave, you haven't said a word.
I just been listening, getting fired shots everywhere. Everything that I hear is we just leave everything exactly the same and self-police each other. That's basically what it comes down to. So, I think we're trying to solve a problem that didn't exist. So I'm gonna be.
So current policy says that we just inform. Do you want the ability to say, no, that's not a good idea, not a good use of tax dollars? Because that would require policy change to approval versus inform.
And then let's just say that you have, then yeah, sure. I'm fine with that too. I'm fine with council to approve that if you want to travel somewhere we all travel, like NLC and all those ones we all go to. But if it's something out of the ordinary, like because, whatever committee or whatever organization you are a part of outside of council that maybe has some tie into council because of organization and you want to go to a conference, and yeah, bring those to council. I don't see it being turned down as long as it's within reason and go from there. I mean, that's what I would do.
Like I said, we've never said no, but we've never had anybody try to take advantage of it either.
So if it's something outside of that, where it's not specifically tied to, we're all part of NLC, there, then we'll go for it.
So if it's not NLC or CML, you bring it for approval.
Yeah.
That is the easiest solution. No.
I think we're adults and we can, send emails and let each other know.
I mean, that's great, but if I want to go to Costa Rica for a trip, that's what I'm saying, like
That's where the 2,000 threshold is. Like the policy stays the same to your point, David, and anything in excess of that's outside of our normal trips and it's $5,000 or whatever number you want to set to it, that's when you need approval. Outside of that, like just keep it real simple.
This is gonna tell us we need a budget.
Say, you said, Jan, you said we have 4 people. Almost a consensus for the.
For the 3+1 and anything over 2,000.
Okay, so is anybody who has not, has everybody weighed in on that?
Well, Dave did something different.
I know.
nobody's gonna agree.
Everybody has weighed in.
Okay.
So I have Roberta, John, Chris, me. For the 4.
Okay, then I will go with that.
Okay,
4.
so 3
Plus 1.
plus 1 in state.
Yep.
Anything over 2,000, ask for approval,
Yep.
or outside of the country.
You guys have fun wording that.
That's why we have staff attorneys that are very talented.
And notification.
Notification.
of all trips,
Yep.
including those that are paid for by outside organizations.
Yes.
Sounds like a good policy to me. It was well discussed. So.
Hey, back to the next topic.
Yeah, move on to informal board meetings. So just running through really quickly the current status. As you know, council members can host informal ward meetings. As I mentioned, you have a $200 annual limit per allowance per council member for eligible expenses such as facilities, facility rental, materials, food and beverage. Council members have reached out in the past to CMO staff if they want the meeting posted. I have also reached out to CMO staff for assistance in booking meeting. And right now, outside of that reference in the expense policy, expense reimbursement policy, there is no separate council policy regarding informal board meetings. So much like the discussion we just had on the travel policy, just putting an idea out there for consideration, potentially of crafting a new council policy on informal board meetings. It could include, limiting the frequency of the use of a city facility for free to once per quarter per council member. And then anything beyond that, you have the $200 allowance. You could also, potentially host all informal meetings that occur at a city facility, and then limiting staff participation to help book a facility. So 3 potential options in crafting a new council policy. So I'll stop there and ask for feedback.
Chris, it's good. So once per quarter per council member.
I'm very.
Yeah, just to clarify that it's the same $200 as you're just now allowing facility expenses to be in the list of allowable expenses.
That's right.
That makes sense. Yeah, that works for me. Yeah.
And no staff participation except. Is that what I'm reading? No staff participation in informal board
And
meetings?
that is informally the practice right now. I think that, and we could include this formally in the policy. As I understand it, the practice has been is if somebody wanted a staff presentation or staff participation, that would need to come to the council to get approval. But I think that's, as I understand it, has sort of been the informal practice. We typically don't get requests for staff to attend or present at these meetings. So we could further flesh that out, that the staff is available to help with the logistics of facilities. We could certainly add that additional provision that if somebody wanted staff assistance or presentation or participation in a meeting that had to be approved by the full council.
I think that sounds reasonable. The expectation for informal board meetings was that staff was not participating.
Right.
It was just the council that was running it.
Then for informal meetings, like, so, a few of us have hosted coffee meetups. Would that be, something that could be advertised in the city? Is that sort of that policy too?
Yeah, so this was also a point that Councilmember Martinez asked in the past in terms of when do we post and not post formal meetings. Again, we included in this kind of start that we would do that when they were at city facilities, because generally we're facilitating those and we know those. You could broaden that, but then we just need to make sure that we have a process.
I would
make
say
sure
we
people-
don't put the city in that position to post, that it should not be a city sponsored event. If it's using city facilities, it gets complicated. But if you're doing a coffee at a restaurant, that shouldn't be posted as a city event.
Sorry, to clarify, I mean, sharing it through our social media channels, not as like a formal posting of like council
No,
meetings.
because then we're asking staff to do work to post our meetings, and that's not the
Yeah, so that's what
expectation.
I care about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then it's just all on us for those type of meetings. And so nothing would change in this policy on that front.
Do keep in mind that whenever three more of you are together discussing public business, it is a public meeting.
So if you happen to go, you can't discuss city business.
Right.
Why do you leave before you
Yeah.
start that conversation?
Right.
Just get John to post, because he's gonna share. it.
John's there. You got something.
All right, is that clear enough?
Oh,
Go ahead.
So if there's three council members there. And. Adam, I mean, this is always like the evolving question of century. If there's three council members there and, so you can't talk about city business unless it's been posted, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, then we'll be posting the ones that take place in a city facility, correct?
Correct.
Is that what we
Under
did?
this proposal, yes.
Okay. Okay, I kind of wanted to clear that up, and then also, what if council members are requesting facilities and there's other organizations there?
Well, you get one per quarter. So if you want to use it for somebody else that quarter, that's taken then.
Okay, so then does that get into anything with city staff or anything, if there's other people and other equipment and things coming, that's okay, or is that?
So and maybe you can clarify, is that when we're using city facilities, there's no staff support. So if it's being used for another organization, the same would apply unless they pay the fee to use it.
Yeah, I think we set up rooms, I think, and I do think that AV and like generally, I think when we facilitate informal board meetings, I think we have created a functioning space for a meeting. But that's it. We do the room set up and get the technology ready for the meeting. Beyond that, that's the only staff support that's provided.
Okay, and just to clarify, so, because it does come at a cost to the city, if there happens to be more than one council member there and then it ends up needing dignitary duty from our police, is that also okay, or is that something that needs consideration?
So I am not exactly, so our typical protocol for council security detail is knowing that more than 3 council members are going to be at an event. That's typically that people have RSVP that to us to let us know that that's gonna happen ahead of time. So if we didn't get proactive, that's partially why we ask you all to RSVP to events, so that we can assess whether or not a security detail is appropriate. So if we didn't have advance notice that people plan to attend a meeting, we wouldn't scramble to try to
So the expectation would be no dignitary protection at an informal board meeting because there's no staff support.
Okay, just making sure.
Devin?
Should we look at considerations on adding things in that's gonna be limitations on what those third-party groups could be, so that somebody doesn't rent out the room and then hand it over to somebody else in that process, that
Well, that's the thing. If we're gonna let them use the room, they get to use the room. If we want to limit it, then we don't use the room. I don't think we can limit from a First Amendment. I don't think we can limit what the room is used for. So the alternative would be, we can't use city facilities for informal meetings.
Alright.
So with that, we're okay with the proposal?
As I mentioned, we'll be quick with this one, memberships. Currently, the expense reimbursement policy really doesn't reference memberships at all. We would just recommend simply adding some language to that policy under scope 2.1. Just adding the underlined text on your slide that just says related to memberships to organizations, just including that language. And then potentially looking at adding a section 2.2, which would just be that council members would provide notice to city council before joining or volunteering before joining an organization or volunteering to serve on a committee. So just another concept to consider.
So other than NLC and CML? Because we're already paying those memberships, so there's no additional membership fee for those.
Yeah, these are any sort of individual memberships that you have or that may come to be as these organizations.
Because I remember
evolve.
we used to be members of the US Conference of
Right,
Mayors.
Right.
And then I cut that when I became
Yeah.
mayor.
We don't see this very much, and so we were even kind of on the fence about whether we add it, because again, the solution looking for a problem, but we
Well, I
thought we
think,
put forward this.
example, like for, we talk about Naleo that's got a membership, so. Womenage, or that's NLC.
There's no additional fee for Womenage, because I'm also a member
No,
of
but
Womenage.
Naleo there is, it's like $100 or something like that, and so is that included in here?
That was the intent with this language.
Okay, and so that
So
would be.
approval for memberships,
No, just to provide notice.
but then I could join US Conference of Mayors without approval, and that's a very expensive membership.
Well, I was thinking of something way worse example.
Okay.
You know, I think approval's not a bad idea, honestly, because you could have somebody who wants to be a member of something that makes the city look bad.
And is really expensive on top of it.
Or expensive on top of it. I don't know about the conference of mayors.
But it's expensive,
It doesn't
but
make the
yeah.
city look bad, but there's lots of organizations that
Yeah.
you never know what you might get in the future.
Yeah, if we want the city to pay for that membership, then we should have
At
a
least the council be like, okay, I mean, this is not like it's gonna be. That just, unless it's.
Well, technically, the council approves the NLC and CML memberships through our budget process anyway, so we could also have approvals for memberships for outside of those organizations. That the
Well,
city pays for.
And technically, these memberships should have some city public business purpose, right?
Right.
Right, just like the one you suggested,
Naleo.
they have
Yes.
information, that helps city issues sometimes, so, yeah.
Yeah, but there could be opportunities for things that either don't have city engagement or are really expensive, and the council should have approval for that. So I agree with you, we should do approvals. Anybody opposed to
Yeah,
that
I'm
for
just
memberships?
protective, it's one of our
Yeah.
council members wants to join, like, the Society of Confederate Mayors or.
I was wondering the Klan, but I don't know.
Don't say that.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
You never know what the future could have, if somebody
Yeah.
wants to do that.
Yeah, if the
And
city's
then
gonna pay for
someone's
something, we
with
should be
that.
approving it.
Yeah.
looking at me, I know I got nothing.
No agreement then on, agreement for approval on memberships. Outside of NLC and CML, because we already approved those through the budget.
All right. And then while going through this process, staff did just notice there may be some opportunity to provide some policy cleanup, two particular sections, for city events and other benefits, and then, as I mentioned earlier, on sponsorships. In terms of, city events and other benefits, we just would recommend memorializing certain current city council benefits. So we would update city council policy 4.1, adding section B listed on the slide there. So we would add that certain benefits are eligible. That would include the up to 2 foursome Thorn Creek golf passes per calendar month for current and previous mayors and council members. It would include the free recreation center passes for current mayor and council members and their immediate family members. And then also mentioning that other city events would also be a part of that. So city sponsored events, festivals and programs. So we would include all under section B of the current policy 4.1.
Justin?
Yeah, I think all of these are great. I agree with all of these, so mark me down for that. One thing I did want to address though is that we want these, whatever policies that we agree on and what we have agreed on in the past to be the effective policy. Not extras added on to that. For example, I think there might be some miscommunication on the existing golf policy because on the passes themselves, there's an exemption on times and the weekends. That was not part of the policy. That was added on outside of what the council had agreed upon. And so that causes miscommunication and problems when trying to use that because the policy is not what is written on the card itself. Those of you that have that card.
Yeah, it's right here. Basically, the limitations are Monday through Thursday, printed on this card at any time, but then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's time restriction afternoon. And
That's a policy.
yeah, it's you have to have some flexibility if you're going out to developers or the nonprofits. Like for me, and this is actually has come up, people are going to cut out of their day jobs like Friday mornings, like they feel comfortable, they can still get a half day in afternoon, you can tee off early. This card eliminates that with the verbiage that's on it. So it's harder for people to say like, yeah, I'm going to take a Monday morning off, coming out of the week. Mondays are usually busy for everybody. So that, to Justin's point, I've experienced it once. And if the policy doesn't have restrictions in it, then the card should reflect that because those restrictions kind of limit policy use.
So I think this is a place, I be honest, I don't remember the detailed conversation around the golf passes. I think we thought we had some latitude to try to balance the underlying business and revenue generating uses at the golf course with that. If the council wants to give direction for this free play to displace peak demand, we can certainly do that. I think the intent, I do think we were trying to put the program in a way that minimized disruption to profit generating activity for the golf course.
I can see that. My kind of argument is we have an awesome golf course and it's very hard to get tee times. Tee time is used at 9 a.m. or 2 p.m. Those slots are getting filled either way. Like we're, either allow it or don't allow it. But there's never vacancy or very few times. I don't know if, maybe I'm listening to these other chime in, but like,
no, we do some
off
peak.
course. That's always
Yeah.
booked, and it used to
Right.
be at the 2 weeks in advance, and you're staying up to midnight, like just to get a tee time.
I think it's really more policy direction from the council. So there are many things that go into the golf course in terms of they do a lot of club play, other things off of peak. There is peak pricing to try to leverage the biggest revenue when there's the biggest demand. And so that it is just a recognition that certainly we could have unlimited play for this free play, but that it does start to compete with profit generating activities for the golf course. But
All right, so I
happy to take policy direction from the council in that
have
regard.
two that are interested in changing that. I have Roberta, Cherish, and Devin. Roberta?
I just started using it and yeah, it is really hard to get a tea time, but and I suck at golf, but also I get it, so I don't know. But I get what you're coming from, Chris, like, it's just so frustrating to try and get a time. It seems like you're having to, I mean, and you can't only do like, what is it now, 2 weeks or something?
But is that a function of the golf cart or is that a function of the, it's a very popular place and it doesn't matter if you're
Oh,
free.
no,
golf
I know
or
it's
you're
a
not.
it's a golf card because you can only do it after noon. I was lucky to get one at 12:06. But anyway, that being said, I'm very grateful for it. So I understand why it is the way it is. But it is really hard.
Did you have other things that you wanted to talk about on here too?
That was it. I just was putting in
I'll
my
come
2
back,
cents
okay.
about. Oh.
Cherish?
Okay, originally when we did the free rec center, was it not for council members also?
Yes, the other direction, this policy is specifically about compensation and payment to seated council members, so we can include that information as well. And both of these benefits were for current and prior. I think this policy is limited to seated council members.
Devin?
I think this is great. I get where you're coming from, Chris, when you say that. The other aspect of it is that I don't think council should be I'm gonna cut in line and go to the front of the tee box and tee off kind of thing. So I understand the need to kind of push things back, and the fact that our golf course is always backed up kind of enforces that even more, because that means that people want to pay to do that, and it's benefiting the city more than us going out and enjoying ourselves on a weekend. So I think this is great. I do think that if there's gonna be limitations around it, I do think we need to put those in there. I'm not opposed to the limitations that are on the card. I think they're totally fine. I get where they're coming from with that. But I do think that we need to have that into the actual policy as well.
Yeah, that was my main point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. It's like the policy doesn't say anything about restrictions, but the card does. So when
So
the
make
people
a
at the
map.
golf course, they're like, well, it says restricted, and it's like, well, we brought the policy forward. That's not true. So the consistency piece is what's frustrating, and where I know Justin went out with some developers and others, and they had to pay for their round and.
Friends, they were developers.
Oh,
Let's be clear on that.
a little less than, but nonetheless, you complained to me about it, so I was like, yeah, that is problematic, you know, so, but to the point of like cutting in line, then we still have to book tee times, so there's no cutting, but just make it match so that we're not trying to facilitate something that the staff doesn't understand.
Right.
So I'm fine with that language, just we need to probably incorporate that too, so everybody's on the same
So
page.
add the language that's on the card into the policy.
If that's policy, then that's policy, that's fine, and we can work around it, but we have two separate things right now.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with that too. I don't golf, so just just put that out there. I don't have the temperament for it, but still, I do agree with everyone there as well. We need to have, this is great. Thank you for the presentations. This is amazing. So, but still, we do need to have some type of, we don't want to cut in line. That's for sure.
I appreciate the feedback.
I have my moments, right?
And ultimately, this is the opportunity to get in black and white. I think there was direction given, but it actually never got translated into a policy. So this does get recorded as a part of it.
I think that's part of it too.
So I'm hearing consensus to go with the recommendation, adding the terms of the card into the policy around golf.
Yes.
You good with me?
Yeah. That works.
There's 9 council members at any given time.
All right, and the last proposal here is in reference.
Okay, hold on, we're back to this.
Is in reference to sponsorship requests. So currently there are 3 different policies that kind of reference sponsorships, and they're all separate policies. So just thinking about having a one city council policy that just governs sponsorships in general. So the recommendation would be to consolidate council policy 5.1 regarding education funding foundation funding, council policy 5.3 regarding youth event funding requests. And then nonprofits is actually referenced in the expense reimbursement policy under section 3.3.14. And then also incorporating into that one sponsorship policy, there's been some council direction given back in 2020 regarding formalizing the golf pass donations to the city operated golf courses for auctions and other giveaways. So incorporating that all into just one city council policy.
Devin?
This is great. I would ask that we add on to that. I would like to see a policy around if a council member is an officer, an advisor, a board member, anything for any kind of funding sponsorships that go through, that we do a policy around that council member is not allowed to vote when it comes time to vote on anything giving to those organizations. Because I think that that's a conflict of interest from that side.
For sponsorships or youth event fundings or nonprofits?
Do you mean sponsorships or like the donation piece of it? Like if like the kids came to us and someone sat, you know, on a, like I'm on the pathway, obviously, so like.
Right, so in that situation, I think that's a great organization, but I think that you as a council member, if you sit on their board or you're an advisor for them, then when it comes time to vote to give them money, even though you're not financially getting an incentive back off of it, there's still a conflict there because it's there. I think that you can bring it forward. I think the council members should be able to bring it forward, but I don't think they should be able to vote that the city give donations or money or any kind of sponsorships to those organizations.
I just want clarity.
Is there objection to that? Is that something to add in this policy?
So I had talked with the city attorney earlier today. I think we were gonna do some additional, Councilmember Byrd had raised this question. I think we probably would like to make sure if that fits better in this specific, policy or in a broader policy like your rules of order or procedure at some other place. So if we can follow up on that, and I think that the city attorney may just want to do some additional analysis.
Yeah, and I've done that, and it's fine under the charter if council adopts additional rule that governs itself. So if council would want to adopt a rule that says if you sit on a nonprofit board, you can't vote on funding requests or sponsorship requests or anything having to do with the nonprofit. So you have that kind of authority in your charter if you want a new rule like that. And it indeed may be more appropriate in another policy if you're talking about any funding request and not just sponsorships. But we could find the right place if council wanted that and bring it back.
I'm hearing that's the direction that council's going. Roberta?
Yeah, I think that's important. I've had quite a few community members bring that up to me. Like knowing connections of council members where they are on other boards and feeling uncomfortable with them voting on money going. And I know it's probably not like a true conflict of interest.
It's not a financial conflict.
Yeah, it makes people just ick. So I think we should.
What about family members?
Yeah, that too.
Family members and council members?
So if you have a family member who works and is paid by the nonprofit, that is a conflict under your conflict section that already exists because there's a direct financial interest there if an immediate family member works and is paid by a nonprofit. So that already.
But what if they're on the board is my question.
Right. This would be a new rule. If you sit on the board of a nonprofit that you, if council wanted to, that you can't vote on funding requests, membership requests, et cetera, for that nonprofit.
I think that
for council members or their spouses?
Yeah, I mean, because while there's not like maybe monetary things involved, like there's still other things that occur, like, and having worked for nonprofit before, and in full transparency, my son works for Laird and Hall now, and we give money, and so I was sure to make sure I disclosed that last time and I didn't participate in that, but I mean, I'm with that specific organization. I remember in the past when I worked there was like weird things that would happen. It just made folks feel uncomfortable. So I just think it's better to keep it as clean as possible, personally.
Is there objection to that? council members or their spouses sitting on nonprofit boards that we would provide funding towards? Okay, and you figure out where the best place for that to go would be.
All right, and then, so just summarizing, the conversation, we will, bring back an update to the travel policy based on the trip limitation on the permission structures. We'll exclude the DC, the council retreat and, city initiated. And then, in terms of, informal ward meetings, we'll bring back, for your approval, the proposal that was listed on the slides. In terms of memberships, we will, bring back, the same proposal, but we'll change, notice to permission. In terms of, council policy 4.1, we'll bring back that policy, but we'll, make sure to align the, limitations on the card with the policy itself. And then, as we just mentioned, we'll bring back, the policy regarding consolidation to the sponsorships, and bring back, further discussion on the potential conflict.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us work through that as well.
Direction.
You will have, we'll stay in policy mode. We will be bringing back the request from Councilmember Ayala on city council direction at your next meeting. We are proactively just looking through all of your council policies. Some of them had not been updated for
Very long.
quite a period of time. So it is possible that we'll come back and recommend and have a look at some of the other older policies. As we've done these policy reviews, we have identified a number of things that just are out of sync with current practice at this point.
All right, before we move on to drones, can we take a quick break? Gavel.
I'm just quarantined.
I don't have a gavel. All right, we'll go ahead and get started again. We're gonna adjust the agenda just a little bit because we have a session on the drone delivery that's a public discussion, but then we have an executive session later. So we're gonna bump that public discussion after we do the boards and committee reports and council discussion items. So any board and committee reports? John?
Yep, Airport Coordinating Committee, we met a couple weeks ago for our quarterly meeting, so we have now in the midst of implementing the Adams County Airport Coordinating Committee work plan. So a lot of good things about it. So we're starting the implementation phase. So plan is basically focusing on 3 interrelated components: infrastructure installation and phasing, real estate development strategy, and regional collaboration and governance. There is a parcel that is being developed in Aerotropolis. However, City County of Denver, in their infinite wisdom, is going to wait at least another year to start paying out. So it'll be at least 2027 before the city of Thornton starts receiving their 5% share. I mean, granted, it's not a whole lot, but still every little bit will help. So thank you, Jessica, for the update as well. I had a little conference with her in our break. So, and thank you for attending the meeting, of course, representing the city staff. So it's a great group of folks. So I'm excited to see what Aerotropolis does, and more importantly, down the road, what economic benefits the city of Thornton will receive. That's all I have.
Justin?
Hey, 2 things. At NADA, there was a conversation led by the Adams County Commissioners. They want to lead a design consortium, partnering with the neighboring cities, including Thornton. They reached out to many of us on here to advance the final 2 inline stations to 90% design. And this is all coming from the Fast Tracks FISA savings account, and combined with upcoming CTE, which is Clean Transit Enterprise funding, that could help get us to that 90% design with Adams County. So that they're pushing forward with that and looking for support from the neighboring municipalities like Thornton.
I think they were looking for a letter of support as well.
Yeah. And so that is likely to come to us in a more formal way than just this report, but that is something that they brought up to NADA as well. Also, there was an interesting conversation about Erie and their modeling. Reason that affects Thornton is because some of the same discrepancies could be impacting Thornton's discrepancies in population growth and economic growth and stuff like that, that factors into transportation and transit modeling, not transit, traffic modeling. One of those. There's all kinds of modeling there. Anyway, that was the NADA meeting. And we also did share a little bit about our work with the stationary booster plans for the. And then the DRCOG summary is, the DRCOG board approved the upcoming budget for DRCOG. We talked about we reviewed the successful conclusion of the regional grants navigation program, which brought in over $80 million to funding member jurisdictions, including Thornton was one of them. We were talking about some mountain corridor stuff. So that was DRCOG and NADA.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, council discussion items. Justin?
So I don't know if anybody's heard or most likely have seen the news out of Broomfield on updating the ordinance in street racing.
I was gonna bring that up. I'm glad you did.
So I'd like to follow their leadership there on that and ask our staff, give them direction to do a new ordinance modeled after Broomfield's, which would give Thornton PD the authority to impound vehicles tied to illegal street racing. So, I mean,
I think before we direct to write an ordinance, can we bring back information on what that ordinance might look like with some pros and cons of what theirs is, because it may not fit us. And then what the consequences would be for adding an ordinance like that, because if you're impounding vehicles, what do we do with them after that?
good points. Yeah, I guess what I really mean is let's have that start.
Yes.
Yeah. About an ordinance and what it would look like.
Any objection to that?
Chief Beard wants a new Hellcat is what he's hoping for.
Yeah, that's the first one we have impounded, right? Okay. The other one is about food trucks. I've received some issues with complaints about food trucks operating out of compliance with the hours of 10 o'clock, I guess, is our limit. And also some questions about how much seating and usage in the parking lot is allowed when those food trucks are being used. And then the number of food trucks being operated in one space. Those are all been, and it's not just one person, it's a handful of people who've all had various issues. In Ward 1, especially on 84th Avenue, we have a ton of food trucks. So we just want to make sure that they are complying with our food truck rules and that everybody is being safe. So can we just look deeper into that? Report back to the council.
So just to mirror that back, get a summary to you all what the rules are. And then it sounded like doing some education enforcement on 84th.
Yeah.
Also on Washington. On Washington.
Any objection from council?
Oh man, RJ, is like 84th, like between Colorado and Dahlia, or is it further in Ward 1?
That's 84th and Huron.
Okay, yeah, I know that sometimes, not every day, but some like between Dahlia and Colorado, you know, in Ward 2, that they're sometimes, I mean, good intent, but still, I don't know if that's unincorporated Adams or if that's City of Thornton, but still.
You might be talking about 88th.
88th, I stand corrected. Yes, 88th, I stand correct. Sorry, my old mind working there. So yeah, 88th between Colorado and Dahlia. I know, like on weekends, it's not every day, but still.
It's a great way to skip breakfast breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, we want, I want to be in business, but still just make sure if that's City of Thornton, if that's Adams County and. Thank you for the correction, Justin.
Anything else, Justin?
No, that's it.
Anyone else? Ed?
I know we had discussed this at one point in time, but up Parterre, 100 and I think it's 52nd area, there's a section of road there that's technically Adams County, and it's only like 100 yards long. Did we look into that section to see if there's any way for the city to reach out to Adams County about annexing that section of the road? Because everything around that is Thornton, but there's a 100-yard stretch that's just dirt. And the residents there are like, hey, why does it go from really nice pavement to dirt back to really nice pavement again? So I don't know if that's something we need to speak directly to Adams County about discussing, or or, because they're, I don't think they have any incentive on fixing it, because they don't really care, but. Yes,
Typically, it's a function of development, and so when a development would come in, at that point, they would ask to be annexed and they would be required to update that stretch. Until it's developed, there's no money to pay for that update.
yeah,
Monmouth County's not going to do it.
right, and the person who owns the property that's sitting there, that's not parterre, there's no incentive for them to
Right,
want to join the city, so they don't care.
right.
But for us as a city trying to provide back to the residents, we can at least look into the road itself to see if we can fix it, because it's not that big of a stretch of road anyway, but
It would have to compete with other budget items.
that's
It's
something
worth
we can,
exploring.
but it's, yeah, it's something we can still look into.
Any objection? To
So like
look at,
competing with budget items at this point in the meeting is a little bit off, since we've already discussed $100,000 for travel benefits.
that's gonna be a lot of that.
I agree, but I'm just saying,
I know we previously did get a constituent request for information around this. I'll make sure whether that has been addressed and we'll get that information to the council.
thank you.
Anything else? I have one, did you have something, Chris? Sorry, I thought you said something. I had one I wanted to bring up. A couple weeks ago, city staff brought forward the idea of a QR code that we could bring money into the city to help with TAF funding. So I was reaching out and talking to some of our charities about that. They actually don't want us to do that. They are concerned it is a direct competition with them to raise money and that we would be taking potential funding directly away from them, and they've asked if we could stop. So I would like to suggest we do not use that as an opportunity to bring money into the city for donations. There's tax implications, things that we'd still have to work out. I think it's just cleaner if we don't do that.
I would agree.
I'm agreeing.
Okay. Seems like we have consensus to no donations for TAF. All right, anything else? Last call? All right, drones.
So, to start this presentation off, we've been notified by a couple of, private businesses about, technology that they're investing in, changes in business practices they intend to pursue. So partially just we wanted to share with the council and by extension, the public, what we're hearing from the business community. So we're gonna just share some of what we understand businesses are gonna be pursuing, and then we'll have some broader conversation about policy considerations later in this meeting.
So the executive session will just cover how you can regulate, if you want to regulate drones in your community and the parameters of that.
So I'll ask, if council asks questions that are leaning into the exec session, just let us know. We'll hold that conversation to the exec session, just in case. Sure.
Sounds great. Well, thank you. Good evening. Appreciate your time tonight, as always. Adam Kruger, Economic Development Director. As Tansy mentioned, want to give an overview on some of the drone delivery activity that we are seeing, so that council was informed on kind of generally how drone deliveries work. So I'm gonna spend just a few slides talking about that, and then answer any questions before we get into more of the policy side in the executive session. So I'm going to talk about drone delivery service and then answer any questions you got on that piece, as I mentioned. Okay, so what you're looking at here on the right is a typical kind of launch location for some of these drone operations. And so generally these are located in parking lots of these existing businesses, at least the few that we have heard from so far. That's how they operate. They take up roughly around 30 parking spaces of the existing operation. The drone would launch from the launch location. Each of those are pads where a drone could launch from the circles that you see there, and they go about 6 to 7.5 miles radius around from that location. So they go straight up basically, and can go 6 to 7 miles to deliver a package, and then they come back. Once they're launched, they're governed by the Federal Aviation Administration. So we have, as a city, some regulatory authority over the launching component, and then some over the delivery component. But once they launch, they're under the FAA regulations. Oh, I should also say, after they launch, they can go 6 to 7.5 miles, and they deliver a package, and then they come back, charge up, and then go back out. So they don't deliver multiple packages. At least none of the ones that we have spoken with yet have done that. They deliver one, come back, and then go back out and deliver another one. So we talked about the businesses that want to do this, engage the FAA to review the airspace operations to determine where they can safely operate. They have to do an environmental analysis that the FAA requires, talk about their environmental impacts, both to the community, the wildlife, and potentially the environment around there to make sure there's no negative impacts there. Some more details on the drones themselves. They're maybe a little bit bigger than council was envisioning, 4.5 by 5.5 feet roughly in size. So larger than maybe some had thought, certainly larger than I thought when I first heard about it. They fly from about 150 feet at the minimum to up to 400 feet in the air, and they go 60 to 70 miles an hour. So pretty fast. The number of drones at each, again, we've only got a couple of businesses that have inquired so far, but the number of drones have ranged from about 12 to 18 drones per location. So those launch pads that you see, they would have 12 to 18 drones. They go out, deliver one, come back, charge up, another one goes out. They deliver products up to 5 pounds and only during the daylight hours. So good way to think of it is basically dawn to dusk is kind of their delivery period. And up to 5 pounds, you may say, well, how much is that really that they're delivering? So one of the groups we talked to, we asked that question, and they said about 50% of their products are 5 pounds or less. So pretty substantial amount of inventory that they can deliver via drone, but it is limited to 5 pounds. Delivery methods vary. Some of them drop it from about 12 feet from the location that's chosen for them to deliver it, and others lower by a tether and then release it.
Drop on my head, right?
Yeah, so, and then noise of these at delivery. So when they come down to deliver, it's around 68 decibels. So what is 68 decibels? You might be asking. That'd be a fair question. I asked that same question. Is roughly the sound of a conversation in a crowded room, maybe, or they say dishwasher, which those can vary on size. I've had a couple that were louder than others, or a vacuum. So those are kind of some things to think about on delivery about how loud they are, 68 decibels. Those are some comparables that you can use when you're trying to think about, or normal kind of traffic sound is kind of what they also compare it to. And then a customer must opt in for delivery, and then they pay extra for this service. So they don't just decide to deliver via drone to somebody. Somebody has to say, I want a drone delivery, and I'll pay extra for it. And the benefit of that for the user is they can get it in less than 1 hour. In some cases, like 30 minutes. So it's like a pizza. Kind of.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be a pizza, you know, so I guess about that. So, we realize that there's kind of some general information on that, but we didn't want to get into too much discussion on policy without at least giving some idea on what these operations look like. We only have a couple of examples that we have been speaking with, but they're very similar in a lot of ways with some minor differences that we've kind of outlined here. So I'll open it up for any questions you've got at this phase before we go exec session.
Devin?
My question is not necessarily for you, but maybe Chief. Does this run into any kind of issues with the program that you're currently trying?
Not that we're aware of, but we would obviously coordinate and have those conversations.
Other questions so far?
Can you tell me the accuracy of this 12-foot?
Actually, I cannot tell you that. I do know that they do account for wind and weather. And then they also account for, potential things on the ground, pet running around or something out there. But they don't fly if the weather is, too windy
Colorado?
or yeah. So they may never fly in the afternoon in Colorado, but wind or whatever. But they do have restrictions that they cannot fly a drone based on certain weather conditions.
Interesting.
And who is the company?
We can't talk about that yet.
And we do have a couple of different ones. So what we've taken here is we've kind of taken some of the general information that we've gotten from them and kind of provided ranges based on, they're a little bit different. As I mentioned, some drop it from 12 feet, some lower it by a tether, some go a little bit higher, some a little bit lower, but generally these are kind of the basis of how their operations work. They're all a little bit similar at the end of the day.
I do think the businesses at an appropriate time would be willing to come and present to the council and share about their specific plans and practices. We wanted to make sure that we had a broader discussion before we facilitated anything like that. Be helpful to know if that was something that the council was interested in.
Justin?
What kind of allowed uses for land use considerations would be allowed for like these launching sites?
So yeah, we may have to amend our code
Okay.
to allow for this use, but we'll get into that in the exec session too. Yeah.
Okay. Like all the different options,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, how we could regulate if we wanted to.
Devin?
Maybe this is an executive session question. But liability for the city as far as if anything happens with these, I'm assuming everything would go back on them, but is there anything from a standpoint?
Definitely, that's true. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't see liability for the
Okay.
city.
Any other questions for the open session? All right, are we ready to move on to the special? I'll go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the city council. Can I please get a roll call?
Mayor Coleman,
Here.
Councilmember Pinto,
Here.
Councilmember Algie.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ayala. Here. Councilmember Byrd,
Here.
Councilmember Martinez,
Here.
Councilmember Morris,
Here.
Councilmember Russell,
Here.
Councilmember Salazar. Here. Mr. President, Your Honor.
Thank you. Before I ask for a motion, can we please get a purpose of the two executive sessions? So I guess we'll start with the first one.
The first one is to discuss drone regulation and whether or not council would like us to bring back any options for the regulation of this, since it does seem to be coming to our community. And so we'll do that in an exec session just to briefly give you some legal advice on that.
Any questions? What would the motion be?
Motion would be for an executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statutes 246402(4)B. Confer with the city attorney for purposes of receiving legal advice related to regulation of commercial drone delivery operations.
Can I get a motion as stated?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed, please say no. All right, can you give us an overview of the second executive session?
Yes, the development for Dodge Ranch has gone to the Planning Commission. Since that hearing took place, we would like to give legal advice to City Council as this matter is coming to you next week for a public hearing. And we want to make sure we review criteria and our current setting for that development.
Any questions on that one? And the motion?
The motion would be for an executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statutes 246402(4)B to confer with the city attorney for purposes of receiving legal advice regarding procedural and evidentiary issues associated with the quasi judicial review process for Dodge Ranch development.
Can I get a motion as stated?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, please say no. All right, we will move to executive session. Just give us a moment to switch the recording.